Hello, I'm bankruptcy attorney and certified specialist Markus, and the topic of today's video is Chapter 7 bankruptcy, what it is, how it works, why you would want to file a Chapter 7. And if you like this video at the end, please be sure to hit the thumbs up. It does help with the YouTube algorithm. Bankruptcy Chapter 7 is generally for individuals, although also businesses can file Chapter 7, although it's less common and less useful in a business setting. It is the most common bankruptcy associated with filing for individuals, in that it is the easiest, I put easiest in quotes, but the least expensive, and it's the quickest. The total time in a case typically takes about 4 to 5 months from filing until you get your discharge of debts. It's quick and painless, usually, if it's done correctly, and there aren't a lot of complications. But I'm going to go over exactly what goes on in a Chapter 7 and what the potential issues are. The main purpose for filing any bankruptcy case is to obtain a discharge of your debts, meaning taking away the obligation to pay on the debts. Not all debts are dischargeable in a bankruptcy case. Congress has stuck in many exceptions to discharge, including things such as student loans, recent taxes, that's basically taxes that are incurred in the last 3 years prior to filing the bankruptcy case, although taxes that are older can definitely be discharged in a bankruptcy case. Domestic support obligations are not dischargeable, and debts incurred through fraud, embezzlement, theft, things like that are not dischargeable. But basically, the way it works is you get a discharge of debts in a bankruptcy case in return for giving up whatever assets that you have that are not exempt. And what I mean by exempt is each state has various exemption laws which protect a certain amount of value in assets that you have. And typically, these are enough to cover everything that somebody filing a Chapter 7 case has. For example, California has a homestead exemption right now that is between $300,000 and $600,000, depending on where you live. So that if you have less equity than that, then your house would be protected in a Chapter 7 case. Again, there are exceptions to this rule, as there are with all, but in general, that's how that would work. Basically, the eligibility requirements for Chapter 7 are rather tricky. There is something called the means test, which you may or may not have heard of, which Congress devised to help determine, sort of a threshold for being able to do a Chapter 7 case. And that applies in cases that you have primarily consumer debt, meaning more than 50% of your debt is used for personal or household use. This would include things like mortgage on your principal residence, credit cards used for personal use, things along those lines. So if more than 50% of that are consumer debts, then the means test is going to be required in your case. And determining the means test is something that's a bit beyond the scope of this video, but in a nutshell, the way that it works is that you take a look at the gross income that you've received in the 6 months prior to filing your bankruptcy case, and you compare that to the median income for the geographic area where you're living. And if it's below that, then you quote unquote pass the means test. And if it's above that, then you go through an additional analysis using IRS allowed standards for certain expenses. It's a very complicated analysis, and something that a qualified bankruptcy attorney can do for you given the correct information. Assuming you pass the means test, the other element that you have to satisfy to gain eligibility for a Chapter 7 case is the current income and expense test, which is basically your actual current income and actual expenses. So you take a look at your if you are a wage employee, you take a look at your net pay, averaged out over a period of time if it's variable, and and then you subtract your necessary living expenses, your rent, your food, your clothing, insurance, things along those lines. And you need to take a look at, does that leave you a surplus at the end of the month, or is it about break even, or is it negative? And so, obviously, in a Chapter 7 context, if you have a large surplus, you're not going, most likely not going to be allowed to continue with a Chapter 7 case. You would need to do some kind of a repayment plan, such as in a Chapter 13 case. And that's basically, how Chapter 7 works as far as the, nuts and bolts of eligibility and what you can accomplish with a Chapter 7 case. You can also rebuild your credit much more quickly in a Chapter 7 case than with the other bankruptcy chapters, because it is over sooner. Basically there are many ways to rebuild your credit, and usually within about 6 to 12 months after filing a Chapter 7 case, you can have a credit score back up in the 700s. Again, if you do proper things after filing the case. For more information on Chapter 7, please look in the comments section below. I will leave a link to my webpage on Chapter 7, and that will provide additional information. And you can always, of course, reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer questions that anybody has.